Hey everyone, welcome. This is our intro to Astro photography class with Tony from Sony.
Hello, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. Thanks for coming along and showing us some really cool gear, as well as what you can do with the gear as a specific method of shooting. I've had a little bit of experience with Astro, not a lot. So I'm probably going to learn. I'm probably going to learn the correct way of doing things this time.
I don't ever claim to know what I'm doing, but I do offer some advice where I go, well, I failed doing this, or this, but this kind of worked. So,
right.
you know.
Well, the proof is, it's in the pudding. It's in the final image. So I'm excited to see what we learn from this. Go ahead and take it away, man.
Take it away. Well, like Tyler said, my name is Tony. I work for Sony. And today we're going to go over kind of an introductory to more of the Milky Way. I don't know. I like the Astro effect of it, but then I think like deep space and this and that. But it's a little different when you start going into that aspect out there. So the Milky Way, for people who are interested in stars and getting out into nature, and that to me is the easiest to start with anyway. And that's where this class is going to kind of take off with, I guess. So. On the screen right now, you'll probably see you got my social media. Instagram's the best way. I always say, part of my job is to answer questions. So if you reach out to me at Krup_photography, DM me, ask questions or this and that, I'm there. I'm more than happy to answer them. Just part of my job. Nobody's ever bugging me in that aspect. So, but today, basically, we're going to go over some basics. We're going to go over some gear, which everybody loves new gear, of course. I know there will be other people here maybe shooting some of the other brands that are out there, but usually I always say, hey, everybody has something similar. I'll obviously direct everything towards Sony, but don't get too lost in some of that. But this will all be the Sony stuff, and if you want to switch, we're okay with that too. So. We're going to figure out how to locate the Milky Way, which can be one of the most challenging aspects of trying to Milky Way, and we'll really get into that. We'll go over some settings, which is fairly easy if you believe it or not, but again, we'll get there. Focusing, and then, of course, some tips and tricks along the way that I've kind of picked up over the years anyway. So first off, we're going to go over some gear, and to start with that, before I get into the gear, I do have to announce we are doing a lot of very good deals for this week from September 4th through September 10th. I have to kind of make sure I say that just in case. If you watch this after that, I'm sorry the deals have ended. But you can save $400 on an A7R5, $200 A7 IV, and again, lots of bundles, lots of trade-in, trade-up deals on there. And all I'm going to say, we have so many deals to save time. Call your local Bedford store, and they will take care of you and go with that.
And if you look at some of the deals, I was honestly surprised at some of the rebates and what the offerings were. If you're looking at switching to Sony, if you're looking to switch over systems, this is probably the best time to have that done. I'm not saying this just from a sales perspective. When you look at the numbers, this really is one of the best times to move over into the Sony system.
Yeah, for sure. Because I've never seen deals this good, especially on this good of gear that's out there, especially if you're in Milky Way, because a lot of this works great for Milky Way. All right, so that being said, so let's jump in. It's tough with gear because honestly, when shooting with Milky Way, any camera kind of works. There's no magic. It's more in the settings. It's more anything else. So I just kind of broke it into, I guess, 4 different categories per se. So I have the resolution, we have a balance, then we have the ultra low noise, and then we had all these camera announcements this week with the new A7C cameras. I had to make a whole new category here and bring in the compacts, which consists of resolution, the balanced, and that. So if we get into it all together, I'll say resolution is exactly what it means. With the Sony cameras, if you ever see camera listed with the little R, it stands for resolution. It's going to be a much higher megapixel than some of the other cameras. And then, of course, the A1, which is the balance of everything. as cool as the A1 is, it's not absolutely necessary for Milky Way, but man, it's kind of nice to have. I was out a couple of weeks ago in the last Milky Way timing anyway, used the A1. I was not disappointed by any means. And you also notice, even though these cameras have so many features on there, I only brought up 2 features. I bring up the megapixels and I bring up the ISO capabilities. Because even though, yeah, the A1 can do 30 frames per second, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good with shooting Milky Way in that. So really what it comes down to is how big you want to blow up the picture. You know, modern cameras, you can boost the ISO up, if you look at here, the max ISO is 32,000 ISO. I always kind of tell people, you can back off 2 stops from whatever the max is, and they still look really good. You know, you might have a little bit of noise, but you can clean it up in post really, really easy that way. And that's plenty of ISO to capture the Milky Way in pretty much in any situation these days. So if you're looking at the camera, if you need the resolution, you're going to blow it up to, size of a billboard, things like that. These are the cameras for you on that, for that. And then the balance, I always say it's about, half the megapixels roughly of the other cameras that are there. Notice the ISO boost. These will all go up to the 51,200 ISO. A little lower megapixels, but still 33 megapixels is plenty for most people. Yeah. For me, that's, people always, I get a choice of whatever, to shoot and grab. Do I always go with resolution? No. Honestly, the most camera that I go to almost all the time is the A7 IV because it is just the most balanced camera that's out there. Plenty of megapixels, great low or high ISO capability, and really works great for this type of photography. Then if you look at the A7C and the compacts, you say compact, those are nice for people who are out hiking, who are going into the mountains, who are trekking and looking for the Milky Way in those really cool spots. Sometimes a little smaller, lighter of a camera, something like this here, you can keep very small lenses, nice small camera body all the way around, and they're great for hiking. So keep the weight down and the size down. But I always say that, and the ultra low noise, which is, well, if you look at the ISO capability on this with the max of 102,400, this is a camera that sees in the dark, but you'll also notice the low megapixels. So it only has 12 megapixels. And really what that means, or the reason why that it can shoot so well in low light, it's all about the pixels. The less pixels you have, the larger the pixel. And the larger the pixel, the more light it can gather. So if you kind of look at this graphic here, if you look at the different sizes of megapixels, don't worry, you don't have to know, the pixel size or anything. It's on there. It's just for reference here. But the 12 megapixels is much, much larger, able to capture more light. And then the more megapixels you have, the smaller the pixel gets. Still doesn't grab as much light, but still modern processing, modern sensor design, all that, they still do a really, really good job. So again, plenty for Milky Way photography that's out there. But I always have to throw out there my overall pick, the A7 IV. Again, I mentioned it earlier, it's just one of those that it's the most well-balanced camera. Doesn't fully break the bank that's out there, which is nice. There's great deals going on right now, so hint, hint. But
save room for lenses.
Yes, which thank you, good entry. So to me, as I said, with Milky Way, you can almost use any camera and be able to do it, as long as you learn the settings, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. But the lens almost becomes the most important thing for Milky Way photography. And the one great thing about the Sony line is we're up to 73 E-mount lens. Wait, we announced another one last week. I'm sorry, it is 74 E-mount lenses. 74. And what's cool about it is, you notice on the screen here, it's one mount. So even if you decide you want to go up and shoot our top-end cinema line cameras, it's using the same mount as the most entry-level crop sensor camera, utilizing the E-mount, and we have pretty much a lens for everything. And we're putting out lenses really, really fast, as I forgot to even adjust this as one came out in the last couple of days. So we're up to 74 of the E-mount. But when you kind of look at the Sony lenses, we really just kind of break it out into 4 different categories. You have the traditional entry-level Sony, which, they're developed by Sony. You know, it's a balance of quality and affordability. You know, you're looking at, let's say, like the 50 millimeter 1.8, $200 and some odd dollars for that one. Just good price point. Great for people who just getting into photography and that without breaking the bank. Then the next tier is going to be the Zeiss tier. Zeiss has been making lenses for Sony for quite a while anyway. And that's kind of that next level up there. You know, excellent resolution, contrast, some good size in there. And now the G lenses, which are kind of Sony's next tier. So Zeiss, you always think of like really quality lenses, in which they are, but now as resolutions get more and more, you have to have lenses that resolve a little bit, and Sony's come out with the G, and then, you know, again, I have a hard time even stepping away from G and the G Master lenses these days, because even the most recent G series lenses are so good that, you know, like our new 70-200 f4 macro has become one of my favorites. I'm like, really, this is only a G lens? Because it does, you know, it's so sharp, it focuses so fast, all those kind of things. And small, lightweight, which is one of the things Sony's redesigning everything right now. Everything's smaller, it's lighter, sharper, faster, adding aperture rings, and so many people are going hybrid with video and that.
I love the addition of the aperture ring, and some, if not all of them, are you can either declick the aperture. So if you're shooting video and you need to go from inside to outside, I love the fact that you're having sort of that old school aperture ring on the outside. It kind of went away for a while. Now it's really coming back. I mean, with all the G Master and then the new G lenses that are coming out, even the little compact ones, like this little compact G, that's a 24 mil. It's so useful to have that and just to change it on the fly rather than go into the menu or press a few buttons and fix it.
Right, you know, use the dials. I'm still used to dials at this point. I'm like, oh yeah, it's still easier with a little bit of aperturing on there. So I am really happy to do it, and especially because I know you're more of a video guy than I am. It's nice to have. And then, of course, we have the G Master, which is our top of the line, you know, extremely high resolution, you know, spectacular bocaliciousness, however you want to put it. They're amazing. You know, of course, the price goes up a little bit on here, but again, absolutely amazing. And I'll kind of talk a little bit here why they become important for stars in that, or at least I hope I remember to mention it. But it's the top tier, let's just say edge-to-edge clarity, less chromatic aberration, everything about it. Let's just say it's, without getting too technical, the best lenses you can get out there for the Sony line. But when we're kind of looking for Milky Way photography, there's a ton of lenses out there, but really what becomes the most important on the lens side is the aperture. And really what you're looking for is a lower f-stop aperture. So prime lenses or the G Master lenses, which are typically f2.8, you know, those are the type of lenses that you're kind of looking for. So even though we have you know, lenses that start at f4, you know, some of the zooms are like 3.5 to 6.3 or something in there. They can be used, but you're still better off, you know, using the lower f-stop. So looking at, you know, prime lenses that are f1.8, f1.4, or you know, some of the zoom lenses at f2.8, those are the ones you're kind of looking at. And what's kind of nice, especially if you're looking at f1.8, they can be very cost effective. They're not as much as some of the other ones, but a good way to get started anyway. Right. So speaking of the start, these are three of my favorite lenses for Astro. The 20 millimeter f1.8, if you notice on there, it's a G series lens. This is one of those lenses where you sure it should be a G? It is so good. It should almost really be a G Master lens, but since it is in an f1.8, it's small, it's lightweight. It is one of my, doesn't break the bank. It's, to me, 20 millimeters is about the perfect focal length for most of the things on the Astro side, so it's usually one of the first that I grab. Again, for a little more budget conscious, the 35 millimeter 1.8 is also a good one to look at. 50 millimeter can be a little tight for doing the Milky Way, but it's it's doable. You can get some really nice shots of just the Milky Way or zoomed in a little bit, but can definitely get there, and that is definitely the most cost-effective of all the three lenses. And then, of course, you have the three Amigos, which we kind of call it, and they're just small. They're lightweight, not as quite as low of aperture like the f1.8, but they're at the 24 millimeters at f2.8. That's the one I have on here. Again, this is the hiking dream. If you're out, in the mountains and hiking and doing and this and that, you can just keep a really nice, small, lightweight lens, and this will do absolutely amazing to capture the Milky Way. They have a 50 millimeter 2.5 and a 40 millimeter 2.5. I always kind of lean towards the 40 millimeter just because it's a little different than the 50. But again, small, lightweight, extremely sharp lenses, and have rapidly become some of my favorites.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that 40 is about how we're seeing with our immediate vision, because I used to think the 50 was that. The 50 was always a little bit tighter in, but in terms of that, the angle of viewing, I think 40 is becoming more and more popular for a lot of brands.
This coming from a guy who doesn't wear glasses, because now with me on here, I have about this narrow vision. I'm more like an 85, but I agree with you. Yeah, that 40 millimeter it's almost perfect for kind of what we see. And then, of course, you have my favorites, the G Master lenses, which again are the top of the line. The 14 millimeter, again, that's my, I don't know, number two. I still kind of like that 20 millimeter focal length for Milky Way, but when I was out a couple of weeks ago, I shot primarily on the 14 and was not disappointed. And if you read the reviews, anything like that, they all say the 14 is one of the best Astro Milky Way lenses out there right now. And again, at 14 millimeter, it can be a little wide sometimes, but not all the time.
But you're getting a lot of context, relative to the sky itself. So 14 is weird. The 14, we have a 12 millimeter to 24, which is, it's a strange perspective. It's almost like POV camera style look. But sometimes if you're in like a big state park, big national park, you want some of those features around you to show, I guess, more or less kind of frame the, your Astro around it.
Exactly. And that's a little later here in the presentation. I'll talk about how important the foreground is for a lot of these, and sometimes having that super wide angle there. And I'll even talk about a couple of my shots that I just shot a couple of weeks ago using it, and why I chose the 14 for the aspect. So again, amazing lens. And of course, 24 millimeter f1.4, if it's not dedicated, it's a good all-arounder type of lens. So it's a great lens, even if you're just, it's great for Milky Way, but even for shooting just landscapes or other things, again, fantastic. And then the 50 millimeters, again, can be a little bit of tight there, but definitely doable in the right situation.
They're not just for portraits.
Exactly. And then you have the versatility lenses, I like to call them, and it's just because they have the zoom range in there, because sometimes we can't always get to the perfect place. Manual zoom doesn't always work. People go like, manual zoom, what do you mean? Like, your feet. You have to walk in and
zoom with your feet.
Exactly. But if you're on the edge of a cliff, something like that, sometimes you don't want to do that. Can be kind of dangerous. So the 12 to 24, which you just kind of brought up there, again, super wide angle, amazing lens all the way around. A little more on the expensive side as far as the lenses go, but still, you can't go wrong with it. Fantastic lens for landscapes, anything about it that's out there. Its only drawback, filters can be a little bit harder to find and to do, but still doable out there. And on that, the 16 to 35 is the one if you're really doing filters, a little more price conscious, still fantastic lens. And the 24 to 70, which is just the all-around pro. I've shot a lot of Milky Way photos with the 24 to 70 just for its versatility. It's sharp, it's small, lightweight, fast. And then, since I mentioned the 16 to 35, we announced as of this week the 1635 version GM2, version 2. Not available until the September 28th. I haven't seen one yet, so I can't talk to it quite directly, but everything I'm seeing and hearing, it is smaller, lighter, faster, sharper than its predecessor, which is pretty much every version 2 that we've come out with recently. That's been the story. Taking out some of the weight, getting the focus speeds up there, and then how they improve sharpness, it's getting ridiculous. You almost don't need MTF charts anymore. If you want to look at it like, oh, draw a straight line, hey, you're good to go.
Right.
So.
Well, and this lens completes the version 2 of the trilogy, of the 2.8 trilogy, of the 2.8 Trinity, so to speak.
Which is about time, and I say smaller, lightweight, and that if you are one of those or that really likes to do the 2.8 Trinity, if you get the version 2s versus version 1s, you're saving 1.7 pounds, or basically the same weight as an Alpha 1.
Wow.
So if you buy all 3 of them in your bag, it's
1.7 pounds total weight savings.
Weight savings on the Trinity now. So it's like an extra camera for the most part.
Wow. So backpackers, take note.
Exactly. And sometimes you have limits. People are up in helicopters, things like that, where you can't bring all the weight. Hey, you can bring in a little bit more, be a little more prepared. So that's kind of the basic rundown. On the general lenses. Again, you can save some money with some of these things. You can spend a lot of money on some of these things. But I'll talk about some of the specifics here in a minute, I guess. But keep in mind, again, there's plenty of great deals going on right now. Trade-in, trade-up programs, some great instant rebates. So call your local Bedfords and ask them what the current pricing is. How about you? Any questions on gear?
Not yet. I'm just keeping an open mind. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of holes to be filled in my knowledge. So, because when I've done very little Astro, and a lot of it was just me guessing. Read a few articles here and there, and you'd spend an hour just going, nah, that didn't work at all.
All right. Well, that's pretty much what the rest of the presentation is, because it's, in a way, it is trial and error. So, yeah. But I'll help out, hopefully, a little bit here. So first things first, how do you find the Milky Way? And that can be actually one of the most challenging aspects of the Milky Way. So, and the main reason is, well, number one, it's not always out there. Milky Way is only out from roughly middle of February through the end of, middle of October, I guess, is Milky Way season. But if you look at the graph here in the oranges, very early morning, and then you get earlier into the evening at the end of the year. When you say early in the morning, if you want to go out there, let's say April, let's just say you got to get up really, really early. And if you're anything like me, it's hard waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, drive an hour out of the city and go do this. It's not my favorite time to shoot, although quite possible. So for me, between June and probably September are the best times to really go out there, even though June's a little hot there, because then it becomes a little bit earlier in the evening. So coming up here, I think the next September 16th is a good week for Milky Way, but you have a very short window, so it's only out there for about an hour and a half before it actually sets. So you're just limited in that timing. But really, so yeah, keep an eye out on where the time is. So earlier in the year, you're looking very, very early in the morning. Later in the year, you're looking at prime spots. So August is my favorite because you can be out there from 9:30 to midnight, and you can get some really pretty amazing shots. I guess you probably should say 10:30 to midnight, and get some amazing shots with the Milky Way. And it's not too vertical. You can get a little bit of horizontability. I don't know if that's a word or not.
We have just now coined that
trademark right here. So that's kind of my favorite. But then you'll also notice that you kind of have to figure out, if you want to line up your shots in that, where the Milky Way is going to be, and that changes throughout the season too. So earlier in the year, you're looking, it's more on the southeast, and as the year goes on, it moves towards the southwest. And you'll even notice, even as you're, while you're out shooting it, it'll start like on the horizon line all the way over here, and then by the end of the night, it's all the way over here. So you have to kind of constantly adjust your shots and move around. So it's just another thing to keep in mind, especially when I start showing you the map and how to figure out where to go. Remember, it's going more southeast, more south, and kind of time where the lights are in that.
Well, and even also where you are latitude-wise, are you South Texas, are you South Florida, or are you New York State? That's going to have an impact on, and I only know this because of photographing the moon when it's, 3/4 or a not so much a full moon, because that's just too much reflectivity, but it's surprising how quickly we're moving, especially here in Arkansas, Oklahoma, how fast we're moving. You get it framed up, and then you're like, oh, I turned away for a second and it's it's in the wrong position. So
it's even in your testing. You'll take a couple of test frames, and by the time you get to your real shot, it's already moved this far across the sky, kind of deal. So,
but that does make it easier for the wides, so you don't quite notice that difference.
Exactly. So, and as you said, so the next thing we have to kind of concentrate on is, well, shooting the Milky Way with a full moon. Not so easy to do. Although, believe it or not, I've been able to do it. But you have to be in just the right spot. Extremely dark sky. But the only problem is, even though you can still see the Milky Way, the sky's pretty washed out still, and you don't get that nice deep black and where the Milky Way just kind of pops out. So it's kind of there. It is possible, but you truly have to be in the right spot for that to happen. So typically, you still have to time obviously new moon is the best. I've shot up to a half a moon and somewhat successful results, but you really want to, the less moon there is, the better. That's out there. And for me, I always say there is a map out there, or an app, Moon Plus, and that's what I use to time it. So I know if I'm traveling somewhere, this and that, I always look up, is it a good Milky Way time? I know I'm in some dark skies there, and I'll bring up this app real quick. I think it's like $7 a year, and you can really calculate, know when the new moon is. And I think, yeah, on the screen here, if you look, between September 9th and September 21st, looks like, good time to get out and shoot the Milky Way. Of course, there are other times where the sun sets at certain times and you can still kind of see it and still get some results, but still, new moon, always the best time. And there's always a cheat sheet out there too. So if you just go out and Google, capture the Atlas Milky Way, it'll take you to a quick download. You can put in, as you said, your where you're going to be, the longitude and latitude. I don't know if it's longitude and latitude now. I think about which area you're going to be at, and it'll give you a specific calendar that'll show you all the best times throughout the entire year. And that's just a quick, cheat way to go. And if you look on the screen here, I know it's really, really small, but it'll show you, best times are in pink. Okay days are on the blue, and then don't shoot, when there's nothing on there. So just Google, capture the Atlas Milky Way, and go from there. So the other thing, so you have to find less light pollution. There's always light pollution, and the best way to find, where there isn't light pollution is the darksitefinder.com. There used to be an app for this that I used, and they no longer support it. It's disappeared. So now you have to go to the website, which is totally fine, but I still like the app. Yeah. But with this, and it shows light pollution, and if you look at the map here, roughly, if you're on the East Coast,
it's going to be a lot harder.
It's a lot harder. You're not out of luck, but it is a lot harder. But and it's just due to all the city lights and things like that. Possible, but much, much more difficult. So if you're watching this from the West, congratulations. You can get it out a little bit more. But the things you want to look for. So right now I brought up, in Bedford land here, I've got OKC, Tulsa, Little Rock, and I put we are here since we're in Springdale, Arkansas. And what's nice about this area, you don't have to go very far. It's not much of a drive to get out of the city, and you can shoot Milky Way anywhere in the green to the dark or the gray or in the blues that are out here. All of that successful. So right where we're at right now, that's a half hour maybe you can probably go and still be able to see the Milky Way. But the other thing you have to kind of remember is where you're at. Yes. Because if you, as I mentioned before, the Milky Way's in different spots, whether south, southeast, southwest, that's a pretty big pie of the sky, I guess we can kind of call it. And you want to not have a city. If the Milky Way is going to be on the southwest, you don't want a city, a big city especially, facing directly in that southwest. So when you're pre-planning, you're like, okay, You know, like let's say on this map here, it shows, they also show some dark sites. So that's where this Buffalo National River, it's a dark site area. So if you were to go there, I guess this time of year, southwest is Little Rock right now. So you're going to get a little more light pollution from Little Rock in this area. But earlier in the season, when it's direct south, there's not near as many lights there. You're going to have a little better luck shooting in the Milky Way. So, and the farther away you can get from the southwest from those lights, the better that can be.
And I feel like you generally get better luck with either a state park or a national park because those usually aren't that nearby a larger city. Like, I mean, the little Astro that I've done, or I guess the most success that I've had with Astro was done in Devil's Den, so not too far from where we are here in Springdale. But I mean, of course, you look at Oklahoma. Oklahoma has quite a few segments that you can go without any issue really whatsoever. I mean, especially going south of Oklahoma City or really anywhere around Oklahoma City is pretty good.
Especially if you go west. And so you say, like, in this area, it can be a little more difficult just because there's so many trees. We got the Ozark Mountains around here. And little towns don't matter too much for the most part. They just don't put off quite enough light. Usually I just struggle with hills, trees, and if you're down below it, you can't see the Milky Way, or you're just getting not the cool part of it. We'll just put it. Some of those dark areas will be great if you're looking for like deep space. You know, you want to shoot shot of Andromeda or that's kind of more straight up. Those will work really well in those areas. So again, you got to find kind of those magic spots. So even as I travel, I now like I'll go by and I'm like, oh, all right, I know southwest here. I know this time of year, and I put it in my Google Maps as a potential spot to go shoot in the future. So if you ever look at my Google Maps, it's got little hot spots where I know I can go back at some point and actually shoot some shots that should be good. All right. Now, so that being said, so with this shot, this was one I just took a couple of weeks ago. We weren't super. It was I was teaching a class and brought some folks out to shoot, and it was close enough to city where we can get a group out without having to drive, 2 hours outside of the city. But, if you look, the Milky Way's there, but you also see a lot of light pollution just because we weren't quite far enough out. We were far enough away because this was kind of outside of Austin. We were far enough away from Austin, but there's still, San Antonio, San Marcos. And even though we're still quite a ways away, they were just in the wrong, that southwest of where we were at out there. So you get quite a bit of light pollution, and you just have to learn to deal with it or drive farther.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it's just practice. Again, I'll drive around and just go, oh, this will work. This is the right angle. I even have in my head, because I live outside of the city of Dallas a ways, and even though I'm close to Dallas, there's still spots where I can actually shoot, but I just keep in my head, okay, I know the directionality. I see a really cool foreground, mark it to go back later to be able to do. So, and that's the other thing is here being in the South, we have to deal with things like humidity and that also affects how much light, the Milky Way. So if you get out to the desert, like in this shot, the skies become much darker and richer because there isn't reflecting the humidity and upper end clouds that we kind of don't see. So out west is really the way to go. And if all else fails, no, actually, it's not even if all else fails. This is just something you need to get. Get the app. So it's wonderful. I use Sky Guide. I know a lot of people use Photo Pills, which is great, but there's so much going on in Photo Pills.
Right.
You have to kind of, it's a little easier to use an app that's kind of directed. Plus, I've been using Sky Guide long before Photo Pills, I think, even had all the extra, they had all the cool guidelines and things like that you could do, but didn't quite have the stars and all that built into it at the time. So I use Sky Guide. Again, it's a one-time purchase type of deal, but what's cool about it, you can pick the time. You can pick where you're going to be. So if you're traveling someplace and you're like, all right, I can punch it into the app and say, all right, I want to be here in this timing. Where's the Milky Way going to be? And you can pre-plan. And that you want to pre-plan because getting out in the dark, it's really hard to see and know where you're at and what your foreground's going to be in the pitch black. So you want to do all this ahead of time, and that's where the apps become pretty important. So because you can punch in, you know, the right timing where it's going to be. They have the augmented reality options, so. Right. You know, you can bring it up and you're like, all right, I've got the arches here. Where's the Milky Way going to be at what time? And plan your shots well ahead of time. So, highly recommend getting that.
Even if you're looking for a specific constellation, I've seen people do that with the augmented reality apps that have that available. You can see these specific constellations that you're looking for. And I thought, what a great use of the technology.
Yeah, and that's it. So even if you start getting into more of the advanced Astro or using trackers and things like that, you're like, all right, you can get a general direction of where Polaris is, you know, just punch it up in the app and get a good starting point, and gives you, and that they're amazingly accurate. So yeah, I use it every single time. All right, so let's get into the settings, and this is probably what most people are more excited about than anything. You know, I always kind of start whenever I get into like settings for specific, you know, photography classes and that. I always bring up the exposure triangle. Most people have seen this before. You know, for proper exposure, you have three variables, I guess, you can adjust. You have the ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. In most of my classes, I always say, you know, focus on the one that's the best for like sports, it's obviously shutter speed. You know, for doing portraits, it can be more in the aperture and things like that. With Milky Way, you're kind of stuck doing manual all the way around, so you have to kind of focus on all of them. Aperture is probably going to be the least amount that you have to worry about. You know, so we can keep this kind of easy. I always say you can shoot wide open. So if you have a lens that has an f1.8 or 1.4 or f2.8, shoot it wide open. But one of the things I always say, if you are shooting on one of the more budget lenses, there's a reason why they're a little more budget. The quality isn't always there. So let's say you're shooting on a budget-friendly, you know, f1.8 lens. You may not want to shoot it all the way open, because shooting all the way open, edges won't be usually as sharp. You can get a little more chromatic aberration, and the stars sometimes you'll see will even just start streaking a little weird in the corners. So to eliminate that, all you usually have to do is just stop down a little bit. So you have a less expensive 1.8 lens, stop it down to a 2.2 or f2.8, and that usually will correct most of those. You're not letting in as much light, so you're going to have to boost up the ISO a little bit, but it sure cleans up the images a little bit more. You're shooting a G Master lens, get all the light you can, shoot it wide open, it'll look absolutely amazing. Exactly. So edge-to-edge sharpness, clarity, all that, you don't have to worry about it as much. And again, you can just collect in the light, because with Astro and Milky Way, you need all the light you can get. So the other thing you need to adjust is shutter speed, and this is fairly easy for the most part. You want to follow one general rule. If you want pinpoint stars, you follow the rule of 500, as they call it, and basically all that means is you divide 500 by the focal length of the lens. So if you're shooting a 24 millimeter lens, you divide 500 divided by 24 gives you 20.83. So basically that means you can shoot an exposure for 20 seconds and you're going to have very minimal star streaking, because the world is constantly turning and things move. So if you go 25 seconds, those stars are going to be a little bit streaked. You go 30, they're going to be quite a bit streaked on there. So you just want to make sure you do a 20-second maximum exposure. The other thing is, so another example on here. So let's just say if you have a super ultra wide 14 millimeter, 500 divided by 14 says 35.7 seconds. I'll tell you, don't go over 30 seconds. And the main reason for that is because now when you open that shutter for so long, you start getting into heat noise, you start getting into a few other issues, and typically you just don't need to go that long anyway. I know we're like, well, I can set a lower ISO if I have longer shutters. It's okay. It's modern day cameras for the most part. They can handle boosting that ISO. So I always say just don't go over 30 seconds, even if you technically could, to maintain. And the other thing I get, because a lot of people will go, well, I have a crop sensor camera, so a 14 millimeter acts more like, what is that, 21 millimeter, I guess, technically. So do I need to do it by 21? Nope, doesn't matter. Millimeter is millimeter when it comes to lenses. So even if you're shooting a crop sensor camera, don't worry about it. Just go by the focal length of the lens, divide it, you're good to go.
Because I'm sure people are going to ask that. You know, I have a 6100.
And that was for a while. People were like, no, you need to do that. You need to do that. But then a good friend of mine tested it out, just went out there, said, okay, I did it. And side by side, did not matter whatsoever. So it was more about the timing than anything else. And actually, so it kind of comes up to the next slide. The one thing that did matter almost more than, or was more than being crop sensor is higher resolution. And no matter what, they're higher resolution. They show more detail. They show more of everything. They show more movement. They show everything. So if you are a higher resolution camera, you might want to slow it down a little bit. So if the max is 20 seconds, you may not want to go over 15 there if you have, you know, let's say 61 megapixel camera in that. So kind of keep that in mind too. And a little bit of streak, I actually don't mind. You know, if I can get a nice proper exposure in that, it's not too bad. If it's too much, then it gets a little weird unless you're doing star trails, but then that is the future class that we might get into. So last but not least, so we covered aperture, we've covered shutter speed, now ISO. And there's no good ISO because it totally depends. So when I was out a couple of weeks ago in the beginning of the night, I was shooting at ISO 800, not very high at all. But by the end of the evening, I was at 3200. So it just kind of depends on how far away from the city, how far. There's so many factors. So I really just say this is the one thing, you lock in your aperture. If you're using one lens, you lock in that shutter speed, and you just kind of leave those where they need to be, and then you adjust your ISO for proper exposure. The correct exposure, who knows? Take a test shot. I always start at 2000. I look at it. If it's way overexposed, I go to a lower ISO. If it's not quite enough, I'll boost it up, and that's just. I don't know how people did this back with film where you couldn't see it right away, but luckily this is digital, and you know, make your adjustments as you go on the fly and kind of run for that.
Well, and that's the mistake that I made the first time I did Astro. Again, I'm going off of obscure articles on the internet because, you know, everything's true on the internet. Well, I'm just...
You're going to believe this class.
Believe this class, not random stuff. But I was shooting at ISO 100 and 200 because I'm thinking, well, I'm opening it for so long and I don't want to get noise, even though I know there's software that can easily clear that up. I thought I knew what I was doing, which I clearly didn't know what I was doing. When I brought those back home, it looked fine. I certainly had to boost up the shadows, boost up the white point, but I just could not quite get the Milky Way or even the remnants of the Milky Way. I wasn't in a dark site specifically, but I was able to pull out some of that blue, some of those purples, but it was tough. I really had to push it. So it wasn't until weeks later, a buddy was like, no, man, like 1600, you know, let's start there and then move up or down from what you need to.
And that's exactly it. You really want to see on the screen the Milky Way for the most part. And you want to expose for that. And believe it or not, you can actually overexpose the Milky Way. And once you do that, it'll remain a nice white color. You'll see bright stars, but as you said, there's like purples. There's all stars aren't white, you know. Some go red, they go blue. They're all different color stars. And when we start overexposing, you lose all that color out there. So there's a fine balance to be able to fine tune it. And really, you know, now I kind of know where to go and what I can do in post-production and kind of adjust things. But I'll say a good pro tip is to overexpose slightly. And that's just because it's easier, as you said, if you underexpose and you start bringing out the shadows, you start getting into the noise, you start getting into the stuff a little bit more. So if you shoot a little bit, as they say, to the right, and bring out your shadows a little bit, you can always add shadows. It's easier to add shadows than bring them out.
You can pull that black point down. And I even noticed that, I noticed this from shooting landscape during the day and shooting portraits during the day, but even at night, even when I was doing those evening shots, the Sony RAWs are still very malleable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just modern day cameras, what is there? We're up to 15 and a half stops of dynamic range in the cameras. So yes, but still, once you get to a point, there's only so much when it's no information in that, which is really just kind of a good leadway into the next slide here. So look at your histogram. So again, I just brought a group out a couple weeks ago, and this was one of the things which was good. I noticed the group had the hardest thing to, because I go and and I'm watching, looking for their exposures, and I'm like, show me what you have, and they're like, there, and I'm like, yep, I can see the Milky Way. Go a little longer, boost your ISO, and they're like, but I can see it. I'm like, trust me on this. It looks good out here. We're in a super dark environment, and the screen's really bright. You're seeing more than what's actually kind of there. So I said, check your histogram. So really what you want to do is once you shoot a picture, every camera you can bring up, in your playback menu, usually just hit the display button, will cycle through, and it'll bring up the histogram of that image. So bring it up. So if it looks like the image on the left here, where you see it's like way on the left side, those are your blacks. And if there's too much and it's, just totally against the left side, overexpose it. Even if it looks okay on your screen, just trust me, you want to keep that off of that black. And if you look at the image on the right here, that's about perfect. So if you can see where you see that it's still a lot of dark over on that left-hand side and a lot of peaking, but usually at that point, you can still bring out the Milky Way, the fine details, all that are out there. And it might even look bright on your screen. I'll just say, trust me. That's it goes a long way. Just pulling it out a little bit. That's on there. Another good, as far as settings go, it's pretty easy. Shutter, you lock it in, you play with ISO. It's really that easy, folks. I should almost put this in the tips and tricks, but there are other settings in a camera, like the long exposure noise reduction. And this is essentially built for this type of thing or anything and what it is long exposure noise reduction. Really what this is doing, you want to turn this on. And what the camera does is basically, it takes two exposures. So it gets more time consuming. This is one of those things where I'm setting up a shot. I usually turn it off because want to go just to speed things up. But what the camera's doing, it takes two pictures. So it takes one exposure, let's say 20 seconds, but then it takes another exposure at 20 seconds. That's a dark frame, as they call it. And then it looks at the noise pattern on the dark frame and then analyzes it with your standard one and goes in and reduces noise that way. And for Milky Way or Astro photography, it's fantastic. It really cleans up the noise. What you're seeing is just really the stars that are coming through and cleans up all the extra. So every camera brand has this out there. Sony, if you're looking at it, if you look into the shooting menu, and scroll down to the long exposure noise reduction, turn that on, and again, just remember it slows the process down. So if you're shooting at 30 seconds, which like I say, don't go over there, it's another minute before you can, take another shot. It's out there, but it is well worth it to really keep the noise down, especially if you are boosting the ISO up. You're in not the greatest area, you're up to 3200, 6400 ISO. It'll definitely help clean up those images. But I know a lot of people who look at this because there is an option in every camera that's out there called high ISO noise reduction. This is something no need to use. This only really works for JPEGs. And I'm going to tell you with Milky Way Photography, shoot raw. I mean, there is no ifs, ands, or buts. There's plenty of things, and I'm like, sure, you can get by without, shooting in raw, save space, sports, that kind of thing. But with Milky Way, shoot raw. Because number one, you don't shoot that many images, so you don't need a huge card or anything for that. And it allows you just the post work to be able to adjust so much more. As you said, there's plenty of dynamic range in these cameras, and you'll get the most shooting in raw. And even with this particular option on Sony cameras, you can't even turn this option on and off because it says, hey, you're shooting raw. It's not even an option. So it only works with shooting JPEGs. And the main reason why you just shouldn't use it is because most likely it's cleaning up noise, But stars look a lot like noise, so there's a good chance it'll minimize the amount of stars that you actually can see out there. So that's feature turn off. What other settings we have here? Oh, white balance. This is one of those things, I'm all about, shooting auto for a lot of things. I always tell people, cameras these days are much smarter than I am. You go 10, 15, 20 years ago, not so much. I shot everything manually for the most part. But nowadays, man, I let the cameras do the work. They're way smarter than I am. But in this particular aspect, because I usually shoot auto white balance, and most of the time I'm shooting raw and I can adjust anyway.
Oh, right.
But for here, which we are still shooting raw and we can always adjust, but I do like to see what my end result will be a little bit. So this is one of those things where I always say, manually adjust your white balance. To what? It's a preference. I mean, honestly, it is just changing the color. But what you want to do for this type of photography is you want to go in and look for the Kelvin setting, so which is a manual there, and you can adjust the color temperature overall. So if you're scrolling through the menu, you'll see a point that says, nice K stands for the Kelvin, and you can manually adjust. For me, I always start at 4200 Kelvin, which is pretty close to tungsten. If I remember correctly, you may remember. I think it's a little warmer than tungsten, but that's where I always start. Again, preference. If you go to a lower number, like 3800, the more blue it becomes. The higher the number, the more reddish it becomes. So if you look at here at the different white balances, because I've seen classes where people are like, nope, I start at 3800. To me, it's a little too blue. So I like that 4200. 5000, that's more of daylight color balance, where all these lights and, daylight's going to be. But if you look, it tends to be pretty warm with Milky Way. And then if you want to pretend like you're on Mars, you can always go a little bit warmer in that, get into the cloudy white balance or, 5800 Kelvin or going anywhere beyond that, it starts getting really, really red. So, but again, if that's the effect you're after, hey, go for it. I like 4200. I think it's a good balance of some nice kind of coolish blues. You still get a little of the warmth, from light pollution, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it can add some drama and that. So, any questions on settings?
Not yet. I'm just trying to absorb as much as I can.
In that case, let's get on to the focusing. And this might be the hardest thing to do, and it takes practice. And all I can really do is give you tips. And I will guarantee when you first do this, you will shoot some out of focus shots, but that is the wonderful world of digital. You can hit the playback real quick, zoom in and go, oh yeah, that's not quite it, and try again. Number one, you're going to have to manually focus. Unless you're in an amazing area, I have had cameras focus on stars, but they have to be very, very bright into the screen. But most of the time, you're using manual focus. So I always say start with go into manual focus and crank the focus all the way to infinity and back it off a little bit. That'll get you very, very close to where you need to be. Other cool features, you're going to want to be able to zoom in on the image to find the brightest star. To zoom in on Sony cameras automatically, as soon as you put it, when it's out of the box, as soon as you put it into manual focus, the focus assistant automatically comes on, and it will automatically zoom in to your image, and you can fine tune it. So if you haven't turned this feature off, it's already set up for you on Sony cameras. Other brands, you may have to hit a button to be able to zoom in there, but, just depending on which camera you have. For me, I turn that auto magnifier off a lot because I do a lot of macro and it drives me crazy in macro. So I always have to
It's constantly pushing in. Yeah.
When I don't want it to necessarily. So I typically will turn that feature off, but for this, I have to go back and turn it on again. And in that, for the Sonys, if you go into the focus menu, go down to focus assistant, and then you can turn that on and off if you need to do. But the key is basically you want to find the brightest star or a planet, because usually planets, you know, depending on the time of year, if it's Venus out there, man, Venus is bright. It's easy to focus on, and you want to be able to focus on that. And zoom in on it, and you'll see just a bright spot. And when you turn it, you know, you will see it become sharp in that. With mirrorless cameras and that, it's really easy to go a little too far that way, so you really have to fine tune it, since it's all digital focus. Is that a word? But you know, you have to practice, and you'll learn on your screen like what's the sharpest point. Shoot a couple of images.
And I mean, I share in your frustration with shooting macro and having that. I think it's really whenever you barely touch the manual focus, when it's in the manual focus mode and you barely touch the ring, it goes into that 2 times or 4 times mode. You can set it up for whatever you want. But yeah, I remember it bugged me to no end. And then I shot some outdoor stuff. I mean, not even just Astro, but even some landscape when I wanted it to be exactly where I wanted it to be. It was really nice because you could move it, you could see where it was, and then you wait for it to time out, and then it goes right back to your full frame essentially. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, if you're doing macro and you're constantly moving it, you're eating up all of this time waiting for it to revert back.
And you can just tap the button and it'll kind of go back out. But if you have autofocus on, then you just messed it all up anyway, too. So it's a battle. It's just one of the things, like you say, when you need it, fantastic feature. And like you said, you can go in and adjust how much it zooms in, how long it activated for. So it has its purpose. We'll put it that way. So for me, what I kind of do, for Milky Way, because most of the time I just manual focus. I've been doing this a long time. I'm pretty good at it at this point. But you can set up just a custom button to go turn that feature on and off. And for me, I go in and just kind of turn it on to the auto exposure lock button, just because I don't use that much anymore. I don't do a lot of panoramics or anything, but you can go in, set your custom key dial, set which button you want to go to. You don't have to use exposure lock wherever you want to go, and turn it on and off. It's a pretty easy feature and works just really well. And that way you can just turn it on off when you need it and when you don't. Another kind of just tip, because sometimes, especially in the beginning of the night and you're kind of setting everything up, finding a really bright star can be a little tough. But if you have, there's a farmhouse or something, or some sort of light that's off in the distance far enough, that gets the lens to the infinity point, I'll focus on that, because that's usually will be brighter than anything else that's up there. Focus on that and you're good to go, even though obviously stars are a little farther away, but it doesn't matter once you're at infinity, it just doesn't matter anymore. Everything will be in focus from there. That's it. That's the hardest part. And trust me, I still do it. I'll shoot like 3 out of focus pictures and go, I got to really fine tune it. And it's really easy, especially if you're picking up and moving it, the camera around, to knock it out. If you're shooting like old manual focus lenses or something like that, you can just tape it into place, and that's kind of nice. You can use gaffer tape, not duct tape. Something with no residue, but you can tape it in place. Then you never have to worry about it. But with the modern world, when you turn the camera off and on or barely touch it, it moves things pretty quickly in that. So, but it's good practice where you're doing it over and over, because the more you do it, the easier it becomes overall.
It's true, and I think even the mobile app, the Imaging Edge mobile app, if you have phones they're a little bit bigger than the screen that's on the back of the camera, but especially if you have a tablet, like an iPad, like one of the larger iPads, like the 11, 12-inch ones, and you can have that set to where when you take a photo, it will push it over to your tablet. Then you can pinch and zoom and really get an idea of your focus or your timing on that properly. Because don't get me wrong, pressing the zoom buttons on the back of the camera is really nice, but it can be a little bit tedious if you're constantly pressing that.
And actually, it just reminded me. So focus peaking, I know a lot of people use that for manual focus. And that I don't find it very helpful with stars. I agree, because it's just not. Even though it can be very, very accurate, especially on the latest series of cameras like our A7 R5, the focus peaking is so accurate on that. But still, it's such a fine line with sharpness and stars, because they are so small. turn that feature off, because sometimes it'll magnify it and say it's in focus when it's just not quite there, just because of the sheer size. The camera's like, oh yeah, well, it's there, but not quite. So if you have that feature on, yeah, turn that off real quick. So you'll have better luck just looking for a nice sharp star.
Exactly.
So let's get on to some tips and tricks here. And I don't have a ton, because, you know, most of it's kind of trial and error. You know, you have your basic settings, you have your creativity, you know, say, hey, do I want it cooler? Do I want it warm? You can do those little things, but, you know, the rest is practice. Nail the focus, and make sure you adjust it and that. But one of the things I've always found that has helped me is by adjusting your screen, and which sounds kind of weird about adjusting it, because we're shooting in RAW, but when we look at the image on the back of the camera, it's showing you the JPEG of whatever color profile you may have the camera in. So let's say you have it in a neutral profile, like, well, neutral or portrait. It's not very contrasty. The Milky Way, you'll be able to see it, but it'll be kind of a faint and in a grayish kind of look. But you can go in and change your color profile to be more saturated, more contrasty in that, and it's really, really easy to do. So on the Sony cameras, if you go into the exposure color menu, go down to the color tone, and then you have your creative look. I almost always leave my cameras in portrait mode, because I think it's just a nice balance. It's not too contrasty. I can really see my exposures pretty well. You know, it's just my personal preference. Most people leave it in standard and don't worry about it. Like, oh, I'm shooting RAW. It doesn't matter. I just like to be able to see highlights and a little more shadows, so about where they'll be. So I leave it in the portrait mode because it's pretty neutral. But for Milky Way, if you go into, you know, the other options out there, you get, I don't even know how many at this point. There's a whole bunch of them. And on the Sonys, you have a, let's say, standard mode, a portrait mode, but then you have another version of it, a version 2. And I'll go down to those version 2s, and you can go and adjust those profiles. Right. So if you highlight, and for Milky Way, Vivid works really well. Yeah, it's, you know, punching up the contrast, the saturation, and, you know, for doing portraits, not always so good. People tend to glow in a little more than they normally do. But for this instance, honestly, Vivid would probably work pretty well just leaving in it. But if you want to take it to the next level, you can, if you push to the right in those modes, you can adjust the contrast. Typically, I will boost that up a couple of notches in the contrast. The other thing, saturation, I'll boost up, even though it's already fairly boosted on there, but even a little more is not so bad. Again, it comes preference overall, but clarity, especially on the newer cameras. The older cameras didn't have clarity, but the newer cameras do. Clarity is your friend with Milky Way Photography and that. So I boost that all the way up, because it'll really kind of gives you more of an end result look that you'll probably end up editing in post-production in that. So this is a good way. And on here, again, it does not affect your images since you are shooting the raw profile. It's just making it so what your end result's going to kind of look like on the back of the screen. And again, play with it a little bit, you know, see what your preference is. But it's a great little tip, because it will magnify that Milky Way a little bit more, make it a little easier for you to shoot. That's out there. Another thing, foreground is everything for me, Milky Way. I mean, I've seen successful shots of just the Milky Way, and, you know, I think I have a shot or two in here where it's just a really close-up on the Milky Way, and they can be very, very cool, but most of the time, the most successful shots have a really nice foreground, and then the Milky Way in the background, and it sets that whole scene. So no matter where you're at, you know, and that's where those ultra wide lenses that we talked about, having that 14 millimeter, like this image on here right now, I'm sure it was taken with the 14 millimeter. I forgot to look it up, but you see a lot of the foreground, gives you a sense of place, and the stars look absolutely amazing. But sometimes, you know, on this next shot, it's not always that easy. I was out, you know, I was in the middle of Texas, and it's very, very flat and not a whole lot of interesting out there. So usually I'll try to find something. So in this case, it was just a dead tree that was out there. This was with the 14 millimeter, and it was a really small tree. I don't even think it was like 2 feet tall, but using the super wide angle, I just got really close, really low, and just lined it up kind of how I wanted it. And gives you something of interest versus just a flat and Milky Way. Just adds a little bit more. And even on this next shot, I was out in the middle of nowhere again. I was just scouting for the most part, but found this nice open field, but I had nothing to find for any kind of foreground. But then I see this sign, welcome to Ladonia. And I went, we'll use that in there. And I did a little bit of light painting, which brings it up on there. That can be very, very important with highlighting that foreground a little bit more, because otherwise, like on a shot like this, that sign is just going to be a dark square.
Right.
This other. I'm like, well, we need to be able to read that sign and something to look at. So, I'm like, well, I didn't have anything with me. Again, it was kind of a spur of the moment type of shoot. So, used my phone, lit it up a little bit, light painted it, and then create a somewhat, successful image. So light painting becomes your friend. And even on that little tree shot, 2-foot tree, I light painted that a lot. And I will say, just as a word of advice, if you are light painting, I know a lot of people do it from direct in front, but I always say treat it like a portrait. Do you ever, if you take a person's portrait, you never have light going straight on.
It's too flat.
Yeah, it's too flat. So get off on the side. You've got, 20 seconds, 15 seconds. Hit the button. You can set a self-timer and wait a little while. Walk over and light paint it from the side. It creates a little more shadow that. So try not to light paint directly on. So, again, another one of my favorite places to go shoot just because, well, it's close to my house. So I only have to drive about a half hour for this little shop here. But I do little creative things. So like on this particular shot, the inside's glowing red. Maybe a building you're not supposed to go into, but the window was open. But so I had a little lantern that I put in there, a little red lantern, and lit up the inside, gives it a little bit of a creepy effect. And then on this next shot, I did the same thing, but then I light painted the outside of it a little bit. And, if you look between the two images, it's a totally, different look, and it's just kind of fun thing with light painting. You can play around a little bit and just make sure the Milky Way's in there somehow. And actually, I would say, as I always say, 50 millimeters a little too tight. I believe I used a 50 millimeter on this particular shot, so you can still get some good shots, and the Milky Way is nice and big in the photo if you have a decent foreground anyway. Any questions on that?
No.
Am I explaining that well?
I think so.
Okay. I hope so, or I've just bored you to death over here. All right, so what to bring with you? I mean, some of the things you obviously need: camera and tripod, which hopefully Sony, we have great deals. I'll get back to that too. Extra batteries. 'Cause this is one thing. When you're doing long exposures like this, the shutter's open. It's using battery power a lot more than you normally would there. So make sure you have extra batteries. You'll fly through them a little bit more, especially if you're using that long exposure noise reduction, because now you're doubling all of that. So have extra batteries. Of course, you need an SD card. This is, type of photography. You don't need the best out there, but you definitely need one to record. Dress appropriately, especially if you're out hiking. Long pants are always suggested. I did not do that the last time I was out, and I did step into, I learned a new bug, a harvester ant. If you've ever been bitten by one of those, probably not unless you are hanging in the desert, but you don't want to. They're one of the more painful bites you can get. If I would have had long pants, it may not have happened.
Just shake them off a lot easier.
Oh, geez. You want to talk about pain. That was pretty good. So dressing appropriately, bug spray, things like that, you kind of need. Headlamp is also very, very important. And if you are shooting with a group of people, make sure it's a red light. Actually, I say use the red light anyway, because the white light attracts bugs. So even if you turn it on and there's a lot of bugs around, they will flock to you. The red keeps that down quite a bit. And the red's just, your eyes won't adjust when you're looking at a bright light, and then it's hard to see what you're framing and things like that. So red light really helps with that. A chair.
Yes.
Even though for me, I'm not one who sits much. When I go shoot, I take like 2 shots here. Like, did I nail focus? All right, good. I go to the next one. I just constantly move. And then snacks and water. I always have to throw that in there because that is one thing I always forget. And I've been stuck out in the desert without water and fairly lost and got concerned. So this is one thing I will suggest over and over again. Make sure to bring pack a little something in case something happens and you have to wait till morning. For some reason, camera lens, I forgot to mention the tripod. So tripod, I will say, this is one thing, having a better tripod will help you out. So again, I took a group out a couple weeks ago, and there were 2 or 3 people with a very inexpensive wobbly type of tripod, and I looked at them and I go, you're lucky I brought some extras here, use this, because you're not gonna get a stable shot with those type of tripods. So this is one thing, again, call your local Bedford store and ask what they suggest on there.
We have many options, different heights, different weight capacities. It depends on what you're doing, depends on what load you're carrying. We're going to get you set up with the right one and
how tall you are. I'm short, so I get to save a little money.
Everything works for us.
There, exactly. So that's fantastic. But if you're 6'5", you got to get a little taller or you're breaking your back the whole time.
Exactly. But getting a good quality tripod, a good heavy duty tripod, is going to last you for many years. This is not something you buy every year. So, buy once, cry once.
Yeah, and that's it. I have a very high-end tripod. And I don't know how many years I've had it. It still works amazing. I love it, and that's what I shoot all my, Milky Way photography with. So, one-time investment, and I'll have it my entire life.
And a lot of these tripods are field serviceable. So if you have an issue, a lot of times you can get parts, you can get them through Bedford, you can get them shipped to your house. Maybe you can have extra parts with you in the field. So should something happen, a lot of them are field serviceable, so that way they last even longer. So they're an even better investment over time.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. So with that, that's about all I have. Any other questions that you think?
No. Even going back to the investment thing, getting a G series or G Master lens, those are going to last you a long time. They're not redesigning the 12 to 24. They're not redesigning the 24 to 70 every single year. They engineer these to last a long time.
Yeah, and even though we are on version 2s, it doesn't mean version 1 was horrible or something like that. There are, and really what it comes down to is as technology improves, when you get into cameras like the Alpha 1 that shoots 30 frames per second, that means the lens has to keep up with 30 frames per second, and that's where that technology, revamping into the version 2, so they have the faster autofocus motors and that. And then, of course, higher resolutions. You got to have lenses that resolve up to there, because you can out-resolve a lens.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even the manufacturing processes. I was honestly surprised that these version 2s are, on average, about 15% smaller and lighter than their predecessor. And I'm looking at, which one is that one? Is that
the 24?
One on the far end there?
24 to 70. So
24
that's
to
the version
70.
2 of the 24 to 70.
We had a lot of interest in those. Yeah. So it's, that's your good all-arounder. That one's going to be...
If I'm taking one lens, that's
the way to go.
One.
And I think that's interesting point about the getting a 1.4 or if you want to do a 1.2, right, f-stop, a 1.4 to a 2.8 is absolutely essential, because if you're shooting an f4 or a slower lens, and then you're also looking at that rule of 500, it's going to make it a lot harder, because you won't be able to open it up as long as you need to and still get the quality you're wanting.
Yeah, and you can, I never really like to go past f4, no matter what. Can you still get a shot? Yes, but now you're boosting, from 2.8 to f4, how many stops? You're supposed to be quicker in math. Yeah. But, but I look at it in ISO aspect. So if I had to shoot at 3200, jumping up to 6400, or having to jump to 10,000, now you're starting to get noise, by just one stop level. And with stars, noise and stars kind of look the same. So I try not to go over 3200 ISO if at all possible. And F4, there's a good chance you'll have to do that. Still doable. But if you had the A7S III that can shoot 100 and some thousand ISO, that's great. And that is, actually, I forgot to mention that. So that is a camera, like if you're doing a lot of stacking or deep space, that's a great camera for that. And I just forgot to mention that on that slide there, because It's a low megapixels. You can shoot much shorter duration and stack a whole bunch of them together, and it works really great for
It's not
that.
just for the video shooters.
Right. So fantastic low light capability there. So any other questions? That's all I got going.
No, I feel like you've covered really everything. I mean, I think, you mentioned Star Trails. That's a whole nother discussion, but I think this is a great place to start.
And that was hopefully my goal for developing this class. So just a good way to get out there, because when you start getting into deep space and everything else, which I'd love to do or would love to do, I don't have the equipment. Again, it's a whole nother equipment level, post-processing work, and it's just a little too much to do on a online class.
Right. But if you do have any additional questions or comments, I know this is being recorded, but put that in the comments there on YouTube, and we will be glad to answer those as quickly as we possibly can. We want to make sure that you're getting the information you need, as well as maybe some of the purchasing guidance. So you can either ask those questions there on YouTube, or visit us in store or online at bedfords.com, and including our social platforms. And then Tony has his own way of contacting him with his social platforms as well. So bother him with all of your questions. No, I can't say that.
Feel free. I might even answer them. You never know.
This was a lot of fun. This was a big experiment. We were doing live streams a few years ago, and maybe we'll do more of those. But this is
much better than live streaming. I feel like I'm dealing with a person here. Yeah, it's much easier that way.
Exactly, a little bit more personal. So we appreciate you coming on and giving us this introduction to Milky Way, to Astro, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I can't wait to get out. I know you're talking about the time to get Milky Way. We've got a little bit more time left in the year. Here we are, and
we've got one more. Technically, it kind of goes through October, but your window is really short there, and to me, I need more time than that to set up. So September coming up, September. I forgot what I said, 9th, I think, starting for a week or so. And again, we have the deals that are starting on September 4th, so you can stock up on there and then have all the gear ready to go out and shoot for the proper Milky Way.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll hopefully see you on the next video we have like this.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.